This cup of coffee cost me $1.79 today from McDonald's. But what if I told you in 1994, this cup of coffee would have cost McDonald's hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lengthy lawsuit? That's exactly what happened in 1994 when Stella Liebeck, a 79-year-old lady, spilled this cup of coffee on her lap, causing third-degree burns on 16% of her torso. She spent 8 days in the hospital and required skin grafts. She then sued McDonald's for gross negligence, originally attempting to settle for $20,000 just to cover her medical expenses. McDonald's declined and offered her $800. When Liebeck declined the offer of $800 from McDonald's, the court case began. Liebeck's lawyer attempted to prove gross negligence on the part of McDonald's for serving coffee that was dangerously hot to a consumer like Liebeck. Liebeck's lawyer attempted to prove this because McDonald's coffee was being served in 1994 at 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit, while in-home coffee machines typically serve coffee between 135 and 150 degrees Fahrenheit, a 30 to 40 degree difference causing massive dangerous burns to Liebeck. In addition, Liebeck's lawyer also found 700 other individuals who had additionally came forward and settled with McDonald's previously, proving that McDonald's knew their coffee was far too hot and was burning people. They were able to prove that the coffee was being served between 180 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit by just subpoenaing documents from franchisees that showed the process of making coffee required the coffee to sit at 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Now for the court's ruling, legal remedies, and appeals process. The court ultimately ruled that McDonald's was 80% liable for the situation and Liebeck herself was 20% liable. They awarded $200,000 in medical expenses in the form of compensatory damages to Liebeck. Liebeck ultimately received $160,000 of the $200,000 because of her 20% liability. In addition to this, because Liebeck's lawyer was able to prove that McDonald's had shown that their coffee was burning people and had knowledge of it, they were also awarded $2.7 million in punitive damages, which was later reduced to $640,000. After the case ruling, McDonald's attempted to appeal the case, but before the appeals process was complete, they decided to settle outside of court with Liebeck for an unspecified sum.
So there's 4 things for negligence. There's duty of care, there's breach of duty, there's causation, and then the most important one, there's damages. So for duty of care, it's basically just when somebody foresees that their actions will cause harm to somebody else further along the line. In this case, the employee notices that the cup of coffee is too hot, realizes that it could maybe burn somebody's mouth or something, still hands it to them. Breach of duty is when somebody acts in an unreasonable manner. And again, in this case, the employee could have just maybe let it cool off for a couple of minutes, maybe make a new batch that's less hot, but instead they decide to give her the cup of coffee anyways. There's causation, and there's 2 parts. There's cause and fact, and then there's legal cause. So for cause and fact, it's basically just, if this didn't happen, this wouldn't have happened, or if this happened, this wouldn't have happened. And in this case, obviously, if the employee doesn't give her the very, very hot cup of coffee, then she has no way to possibly get burnt or anything. And then there's legal cause, which is just the harm has to be a foreseeable result of the actions of the defendant. And this obviously is. The cup of coffee was too hot. She got burnt by the cup of coffee. And then there's damages, which again is the most important one. Because negligence, there's no claim for negligence without some sort of damage or some sort of harm. And for damages, the plaintiff has to suffer actual harm from the defendant. And in this case, the lady got hospitalized for 2 days, or 8 days. She got hospitalized for 8 days. She had to do skin grafting. She had to do rehab for 2 years after the fact of being burnt just to get her mobility back in her hips. And then again, there's also a whole bunch of medical expenses with that. So
when it comes to personal injury cases like Liebeck v. McDonald's, some key legal concepts come into play. Things related to negligence, specifically focusing on defenses to negligence and the types of damages that can be awarded. First, let's talk about assumption of risk. This is a defense that applies when the plaintiff, the person suing, knowingly and willingly takes on a risk. Think of it like this. If someone chooses to participate in a dangerous activity, like skydiving, they can't sue if something goes wrong because they knew what they were getting into. In the Liebeck case, McDonald's might have tried to argue that customers assume the risk by knowing the coffee is hot, but the court didn't buy that argument. Why? Because the coffee in question wasn't just hot, it was served at a dangerously high temperature, about 190 degrees. The court decided that people don't expect coffee to be that hot, so McDonald's couldn't use assumption of risk as a defense. Next, we have contributory negligence. This defense says that if the plaintiff is even partially at fault for their own injury, they might be completely barred from recovering any damages. So if you're suing someone, but you're found to have played a role in causing the injury, like running a red light and crashing, you could be shut out from receiving compensation entirely. In the Liebeck case, McDonald's could have argued that Stella Liebeck was partially responsible because she was holding the cup between her legs when the coffee spilled. But the jury didn't agree. They decided McDonald's was primarily at fault because of how hot the coffee was. So even though there was a slight possibility of contributory negligence, the jury sided with Liebeck. Now, let's talk comparative negligence. This is a bit different. In cases of comparative negligence, the court looks at how much each party is at fault for the injury and adjusts the damages accordingly. For example, if the jury decides the plaintiff is 20% at fault, they'll reduce the damage by 20%. So, if Stella Liebeck had been found to be 20% at fault for the coffee spill, her award would have been reduced by 20%. But in her case, the jury felt McDonald was mostly responsible, so they didn't need to adjust the damages that much. But what happens if the plaintiff wins their case? They might be awarded compensatory damages. These are meant to compensate the plaintiff for their actual losses, like medical expenses or lost wages. There are two types of compensatory damages: economic damages, like medical bills or lost income, and non-economic damages, which cover things like pain and suffering or emotional distress. In the Liebeck case, Stella Liebeck was awarded both. She had significant medical bills for her treatment, and she also received compensation for the pain and suffering caused by the burns. The jury awarded her a combination of both economic and non-economic damages to cover her losses. Lastly, let's talk punitive damages. These are different from compensatory damages. Punitive damages are awarded not to compensate the plaintiff, but to punish the defendant and discourage similar behavior in the future. They're meant to send a message that what the defendant did was wrong and shouldn't happen. In Liebeck v. McDonald, the jury awarded punitive damages because McDonald's had been serving coffee at a dangerously high temperature. The company had been warned about the risk before, and the jury wanted to punish McDonald's for being reckless and deter them from putting customers at risk again. It wasn't just about compensating Liebeck, it was about holding McDonald's accountable for its actions.